Welcome, and thanks for joining us as we spotlight members of the Jesuit community at Holy Cross. I'm Father Keith Maczkiewicz, Assistant Chaplain for Liturgy and the Chaplain of the first year class of 2024. And today I'm joined by my brother Jesuit, my local superior, Father Jim Storms. Good afternoon, Father Rector.
Good afternoon, Keith.
He hates when I call him that.
Oh, man.
Under normal circumstances, under normal circumstances, Jim and I would be sitting across from each other, perhaps in the Jesuit residence or in his office or my office, but as we know, these are not normal circumstances. So we're coming together. We're going to take advantage of technology today to come to you. Since 2016, Jim has served as the rector of the Jesuit community here at Holy Cross, responsible for the care of the men and overall administration of the community. Jim is no stranger to campus. He attended Holy Cross from 1965 to 1967 and then joined the Society of Jesus. He studied in St. Louis, in Austin, Texas, and at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where he earned his PhD in economics. Jim's enjoyed a lifelong interest in economic development and international ministry, and he's worked in Central America, South America, and most recently at Hekima University College in Nairobi, Kenya. Jim also has experience as a major superior, it's a little insider language, which we'll talk about later, serving as provincial of the former Maryland province, back when there was such a thing, and as an administrator at the Jesuit Conference, both national, international Jesuit organizations. So thanks for being with us today, Jim.
Good to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
So Jim, we're going to do a little get to know you. I know that now you have family that lives in the Newburgh, New York area, but you're not originally from there. You were born in, or raised in Randolph, Massachusetts. Would you tell us a little bit about kind of what life was like growing up there?
I think of it in two halves. From age 0 to 9, I was an only child, and Randolph was actually, believe it or not, it was kind of a New England factory town. There was the Randy sneaker factory, where my mother, along with a number of women in the neighborhood, worked to make a little extra money in the evenings. Right down the street from the house that I grew up in, there were still farms. So it was kind of a town on its own. Around the time that I turned 9, two things happened. First, my kid brother was born, and then my kid sister, and then my baby brother. So all of a sudden, I was no longer an only child. I was a babysitter, unpaid. I mean, they paid me by food and lodging. And Randolph became a suburb. So when I was younger, there was about a mile of woods behind my house. By the time I left to come to Holy Cross, there were no woods at all. It was all houses and development and whatever. And Randolph had become a suburban town for Boston. So there was a lot of change that happened in those 10 years. It was kind of fun to be, I don't know, kind of on that cusp,
Yeah. Was Randolph close enough to have a T-stop, or was it on a commuter line?
No, neither. It was Route 24, and then connecting to 128 and what was then the Southeast Expressway, which my father, who worked in downtown Boston, called the foe. So I'm leaving to face the foe, he would say. So
that's a good story.
Oh yeah, that's true.
When did the family move to the New York area?
Couple of steps. You mentioned that I'm in the Maryland province. Why would that be if I grew up in New England? Because my family, the summer that I came to Holy Cross, my family moved to Baltimore. My dad's job changed. So they were there about 5 years. And then his job moved him up to the Newburgh, New York area. And the great thing was, in the middle of all that moving, I had finished my studies in Pennsylvania and had gone to St. Louis and this and that. So there was a while where we didn't have each other's addresses. So I didn't know where my family was, and they weren't quite sure where I was, you know. So, but they've been in the Newburgh area. All of my brothers, my sister and my brother are both in the Newburgh area. My kid brother is in Indiana, of all places.
Would you consider Newburgh home now?
I consider my sister's house home.
Yeah.
Yeah. The area doesn't mean much to me, but
yeah.
But my sister's been the one since mom passed. My sister's been the one who's taken care of me, right? So.
Charlie Dunn used to say that too, that when his mother died, his sister's home, that became kind of like where he felt most at home. That's interesting to me. Oh
yeah, and of course Charlie's, now Charlie's nieces, stepped right into that role. I'm not quite there yet, so. But could well be. That's right. I have to say, the first time Charlie's nieces came for lunch, he said, "My nieces are coming." I don't know why. I had in my mind these very young people. Oh, of course, yes. But Charlie's some lollipops. No. Because Charlie Dunn, of course, is 97. His nieces are in their 70s. It blew my mind. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about your time at Holy Cross as an undergrad. So you were here in the mid 60s, just on the cusp of a lot of social turmoil in the country, in the world, and on campus as well. I wonder, what was it like for you here? Did you miss that stuff? How much of that were you here for? And why did you leave? Why only 2 years? Now, Keith, you know better than to ask me that question. Because as I've tried to tell Father Vodopoulos and others many times, I have very little recollection of those years. And it's not Holy Cross's fault. It's that I went away for 50 years and, couple of recollections though. One, on the one hand, I was in ROTC. My dad was a military guy, and so I was a contract ROTC guy, so I wasn't in scholarship, but I was in, and I enjoyed that. So on the one hand, I was kind of a military guy. On the other hand, I worked in the coffee house that there was at the time in Campion, as I remember, which was kind of a place of kind of more lefty or I don't know if we would use progressive at the time, but so I was kind of had both of those sides to this. I earned my little extra money working in Kimball. I was a waiter in the days when you actually had waiters and brought out the mystery meat, the potatoes, green beans, bread, and water, and that was that. I got teased so much about not remembering anything that I finally asked for my transcript, and the registrar people were very nice and sent me my transcript. I should not have done that. I was so embarrassed by a couple of things that I remembered and some other things that I didn't remember at all. And the ones that I didn't remember, I didn't do very well in. So that's probably why I didn't remember them. So it was, let me put it this way. I'm not going to put my transcript on the Jesuit bulletin board for all to see. I'll just leave it in my my little bottom drawer as history. Yes, a little memento. The one thing though that was very different, of course, was that this was all men. And there was some conversation about going coeducational, and And that was kind of one of the interesting things that was going on. And as I remember, there was things written in the newspaper and such. A couple of stories around that, but yeah, maybe that's enough.
So why just 2 years? What made you leave to join the Jesuits?
I had, thought off and on. I always felt comfortable in church. We had a good parish. We had good priests who were comfortable to be with. I was an altar boy. I had talked to some priests early on about maybe, going to the seminary, and then it would sort of disappear. And for some reason, in the middle of my sophomore year, it was just kind of ringing in my head. And Father Bob Lindsay, who was one of the chaplains at the time, was immensely helpful to me in kind of sorting all that out. And once I did, it just felt like, well, I could stay at Holy Cross and kind of, bide my time, or I could just go do this and get on with it. And that's kind of how it felt. I've often wondered what life would have been like, as we say, had I stayed at Holy Cross. So that's one of those things that maybe I'll ask the Lord, at the end of time. So what was that all about? And how, but somehow it just became very clear to me, it's time to move on. And I was glad I did, and I felt good with it, with what happened after that. So I never looked back and said, oh, gee, I should have. But I have wondered. I wonder what that would have been like. Because your junior and senior year, of course, are the years when you get kind of most involved with whatever the organizations are that you're in, or the band or the choir or all of that stuff. So it would have been interesting. And it's probably I would certainly remember more, if I had been here 68 and 69 than just the time that I've been here.
Yeah. I knew Bob Lindsay at the end of his life at the infirmary. He was a character at the end of his life? Was he a character? Do you remember him being a character when you were an undergrad?
Yeah, I don't remember being, a major character, but he was very down to earth and very direct. I do remember that. He wasn't didn't soft pedal things very much. I ran into Bob later. Maybe when I was a novice, I was at Gloucester, and again he was very helpful to me, but not in a soft way, but kind of in a very direct, look, here's what you got to do kind of way, So he was very good to me. But I understand he was a painter. There's I think paintings around, of his, maybe still in the house, huh?
Yes, at the infirmary. And what's interesting, the province has that oral history program of all these Jesuits.
Like those little red books, yeah.
I have to say his is the most fascinating because many of them are very formulaic, right? I grew up outside of Boston. I went to BC High. I went to Holy Cross. I entered the Jesuits. There's like a lot of stories like that. He basically sits down and says, I don't want to tell my story like that. I want to tell you about 5 major moments in my life. It's a fascinating read.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, and it's very Bob.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's his fault. At least in part, it's his fault that I'm here. So.
Well, you have to take that up with him too in the next life.
That's right. Well, check that out. That's right. Yeah.
Well, Jim, in addition to being the rector of the community and the administrator of our house, you also teach. You're in the economics department, and you offer a very popular course. I think you are offering it every semester on African economies. So you have these interests, obviously, in international ministry and economic development. Have you always been interested in that, or when did that start for you?
As a novice. I guess I had something in the back of my head. When I was a novice, there was a an experiment, as we call them, an experience that you have as a novice that opened up in Guatemala. It was kind of an experimental experience. So 3 of us went to Guatemala and worked in a parish for 6 weeks. And it was during that time that I kind of ran into these issues of poverty, but also how the economics worked. For example, in the parish, we were distributing food to poor people. And that was good, and we were doing that. And then one day I took a walk downtown to the market, and there were those people who we had just given this food to selling that food so that they could then use the money and buy food that they really wanted rather than whatever it was that we were giving them, wheat or grain or whatever. And that sort of got me thinking, well, now wait a minute, but there's something wrong here with this, and maybe we ought to just be giving them money to begin with, and they, and why isn't that? And that kind of got me rolling. That experience kind of got me thinking about this stuff. And I went back to, I went back to St. Louis and took a couple of economics courses and kind of liked them. And then Father Frank O'Connor, who was then the Dean of Studies, in those days we had somebody who was supposed to be watching over what you were studying. And he came out to visit, and I said, yeah, I've been taking these economics courses. And he looked at my transcript, or not transcript, but our the list of things that he had. He said, you're not supposed to be studying economics, you're supposed to be studying psychology. I said, oh, yeah, I thought I'd just take some economics courses. He said, you can't do that. You can't just decide on your own. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want me to go back and erase them? So, but that's what got me going. And then I got interested from there in kind of alternative economic stuff, alternative economic theories, and that really sort of caught me. So then I went to Latin America, and then the rest is history. So, but that's how I got into it.
Yeah. Do you think you'd ever go back abroad again?
I don't feel a great pull to do that. If there were an offer or a conference or something that said, hey, we'd like you to come back and, give a little talk on this. And, I'd be happy to go back and say hi to some people. And, but I don't feel like I want to, go back and teach or settle in. The interesting thing is that last night, there was a TV show about Kenya, which is where I was, about the elections which were happening around the time while I was there. And it was really interesting to see that. And I had that question. I thought, is this going to ring in my head so that I want to get back there? And not so much. I mean, happy to visit, but I think this is right.
Yeah. How was the transition going from living abroad? How long were you in Kenya for?
4 years.
And how was it coming back, and especially back to Worcester?
If you asked me that right after I got back, I would have said no problem. But after that, it got to be a little tricky, and I've never quite figured out what that was about. But there was some time of, wondering whether it had been the right thing to do, and should I go back, and should I stay here, and how does that fit? How does my being at Holy Cross fit into my interest in economic development and such? And here's a shout out to the economics and accounting department, because they were very kind to me. I had been out of the business of serious economics, although I did some teaching when I was in Kenya for a good while. But they were very welcoming and said, let's talk about what you might do and how you might be part of the department. And so they've been very good to me. And that made a big difference, because I felt like, that was able to connect me to the two sides of the two experiences. So that was a real help. But I was a little surprised. It was a little tricky there for a little bit, but eventually settled down and it was fine.
Yeah. It's good. I always think it's great that you're teaching in economics and accounting, because you think you might be the only Jesuit teaching in a non quote unquote traditional department for us, like religious studies or philosophy.
Right.
So it's so great that you're in one of those other departments. That's great.
Yeah, I enjoy it, and I've I have learned a lot from my colleagues, and I must say I feel comfortable in the department because many of my colleagues do some really interesting things. Even though economics has the the reputation for being just numbers and graphs and who cares. But folks do stuff on the environment, and they do stuff on conflict, and they do stuff on sports. So it's an interesting China. We've got experts on all of these areas, and it's so I'm happy to be part of that crowd. Although I don't get to spend as much time with them as I might like, but it's made a real difference for me.
Yeah. Jim, you served as provincial of the Maryland province in the late 90s into the early 2000s. There was a kind of a tumultuous time there, especially in the early 2000s. I wonder if you might just very briefly say, like, what does that mean? What is the provincial? What does that job title mean? And what was that experience like for you, that 6-year term?
Briefly, huh? The provincial is the guy who is in charge of Jesuits in a region. So Maryland was Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina. And really the provincial is the guy who is supposed to decide on what Jesuits will be doing, what their mission is. And because of that, the provincial has the privilege of having very meaningful conversations once a year with each one of the men, so as to have a sense of what would be a good mission for this man. I think that's really the heart of much of what the provincial does. And that's the real joy of the job, is having those kinds of conversations with guys, because most Jesuits, are doing quite well and are really good men, and the conversations are a pleasure. Of course, as with any group, there are difficulties, and as with any group, the difficulties end up on the boss's desk. So, that's what people think of when they think about a provincial's job. Oh, how do you deal with, this guy or that problem or whatever? And that's there. But the real joy is the ordinary conversation, the ordinary conversations with ordinary guys. I was the provincial from 96 to 2002. And so I was really pretty lucky. Those years were only beginning to be tumultuous, and so in many ways we were able to do some really interesting things in terms of shifting things around in the province, and I always interested in the international stuff. We were able to be generous with some of the needs of the broader society, and that was a great joy. To be able to be helpful to provinces that were just getting going or that were having some trouble. And I did the international travel myself rather than have someone else do it for me, and so I really enjoyed that. The early 2000s, we began to run into the kinds of crises that we all know have been so difficult for the people, for God's people, and so we began to have to deal with that. But the folks who came after me, I think, had more challenges. So I really, and people laugh at this, especially Jesuits, but I really enjoyed my time as provincial. So.
Were they, would you say those were the happiest 6 years you've had as a Jesuit? What's been your favorite? No. What's been your favorite moment or place or time?
My favorite time was in Chile in South America for Regency, which for those who might not know the Jesuit lingo is a time of work. You know, we joke about, you know, we need to get work out of the young guys, you know, while they're still young. So all of us at some point in our studies take 2 or 3 or more years of typically teaching, you know, but it might be some other kind of ministry. So I was in Chile for those years, and I was put in a community that was beginning to work with young people using a structure called Christian Life Communities. And it was a time of a lot of energy and new kinds of apostolates, and the community was this crazy bunch of internationals. So there were a couple of Chileans, but there were 2 Maltese of all people, 2 Americans. Who else was there? There was somebody else. But it was just this real mix of folks, and we, you know, we fought and you know, we struggled, but we had a great time. It was about 8 of us, more or less, and it was just a wonderful time. And when my 2 years were up, I asked my home provincial if I could stay for another year, and he said, "No, you're having too much fun. It's time for you to come home and get on with it." But it's, you know, it's a group of guys that I've continued to be in touch with. The Juanito Diaz, who was one of the community, was a provincial at exactly the same time that I was provincial in Maryland. So we exchanged provincial visits at one point and told old stories. And I ran into another one of our guys, the guys I was with, of all places, in Burundi. He was working on with JRS, and this was like 20 years later, and all of the young people said, "How you guys knew each other 20 years ago? How is that possible?" So that, you know, I've always thought that was the most fun. That was, and I learned a lot, and you know, got challenged to do some things that I was like, no, I can't do that. Yeah, you can, come on. So, you know, that was a very good time, among many good times, but, you know, that was my favorite moment.
Jim, perhaps just one more question. Just before we started recording, we were talking about with Tom Cadigan in the alumni office that this episode of Fridays with the Fathers is going to drop just around Election Day, just afterwards, probably. You know, that will be a challenge for probably close to half of the country, depending on what side, you know, we'll kind of see how that goes. These have been challenging months, right? Certainly for our nation, for the world, and close to home here for our campus community and the Jesuit community as well. I wonder, would you share just a few words? How do you find hope now in these unsettled times? Where are your sources of hope?
Yeah, I think, you know, as with most things, you know, the hope that you see is in people's actions and the way people are responding, and you know, the generosity and energy. And so, you know, when you talk about, you know, where is the hope in the coronavirus, you know, well, the hope is in the kinds of generous work that frontline workers have done. I think the hope you know, and I, you know, show my political bias here, I guess, you know, but my hope is in part in all of the efforts that have gone into organizing and people getting clear and making commitments in terms of, I guess I'll say whatever policies you're interested in, but the energy that is out there around the politics, while in some ways it's scary, you know, on the other hand, at least, you know, for the people who I would point to, you know, however the election goes, those people will continue and the work will continue. And, you know, and so that would be where the, I think where the hope would be, and the challenge to me and to us, you know, in the society, you know, how can we hopefully continue to play a role in that. But, you know, it doesn't all stop on November 3rd, regardless of how it goes. So that's what I try to pay attention to after I've listened to the morning news.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Jim, you give me hope. We didn't get to talk about it today for lack of time, but your work with other guys in the house doing the work of the spiritual exercises in the Diocese of Worcester, I think there's great hope there. Your devotion to the Nativity School in your role as rector, kind of guiding that school through as much as you can, but also serving on their board. You know, there's a lot of hope there, I would say, you know, and in a lot of the very local things that people are doing. But thanks for spending time with us for today, with giving our alumni and friends a little glimpse of what it's like to be Jesuit and the rector at Holy Cross. And you've been very good in the pandemic, keeping our community going. We've had our own unique challenges, and frankly, you've been very good to me. So I appreciate it.
No, it's been great, and thanks for the conversation. It's been,
oh yeah, these have been fun.
Yeah, good.
For everyone out there, keep an eye out for our next community profile in the coming weeks, and until then, be well.